Okay, welcome to critical introduction to corrections. And so I want to remind you that you want to make sure that you connect your audio so that you can hear me, because otherwise you can't hear me. And you need to make sure that you utilize this tab. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so again, you have my information as to how to contact me. You should realize that you can call me any hour of the day or text me except the 25th hour of the day, and that includes Sundays. There's no off time, so feel free to reach out to me. And then I remind you that after today, we'll have just 4 more lectures: week 4, week 6, week 8, and week 10. So now let's go and let's take a look at our announcement for this week. I'll preface it before I get into the announcement that many students have contacted me about the question about the project, and I encourage students to listen to that archive which I sent you last week that we did, and I spent a lot of time covering that issue, and so I've redirected every student back to that, and you should save that. And I also want to remind you to make sure you use your rubrics to make sure that you're doing your assignments on time, and that you'll discover this week that this is the first written assignment that's due for your project. So we're going to get to that in a second here, but this week we're going to talk about sentencing and the correction process. Section 4 of the textbook, corrections, and then also sentencing issues and sentencing definitions. It's an activity. And then, again, reminding you of our lecture today and our discussion assignment, goals and philosophy of sentencing. You want to make sure that you have completed that as well. Your initial post is due yesterday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, and Tuesday it was, and then Saturday your reply post is due. So you want to make sure that you do that. Finally, make sure you complete the written assignment, determinate or indeterminate sentencing, and then, of course, your course project, selection of agency/contact person. Make sure you give me detailed information, everything that the module asks for. We're going to go over that in a second. This is the first assignment that you will be graded on, and I gave you the rubric for the grading of that project, and you want to make sure. And then finally, I gave you the motto, adversity is the springboard to success. I elaborated on that last week, so I'm not going to go over that again. So now I'm going to take a minute, excuse me, and go to the course calendar so that you can see on your calendar, which I encourage you to do. This is the second week, so your reading assignment was given already, and it told you what to read, and then it told you your initial posts, goals and philosophy of sentencing, and then the same thing for the second assignment, for the reply post. And then Sunday, your written assignment is due. Determine and indeterminate sentence. Make sure you have your APA citations and references. Be sure to do an adequate job of preparing the assignment which requires 2 pages. Repeating the facts does not help to satisfy. I am more interested in your critical thinking, and I've discussed that last week about critical thinking. Okay. I want to see something a minute. Let's go back to the course home page. I want to see something. Okay. Let's see what I want to see. Okay. Go back to the course calendar again. Okay, very good. So anyway, that's the course calendar for the week. And then, of course, next week we'll be in week 3, and you'll see the assignments. Now, I already said this, that week 3 information will be available to you by Friday. And you have to get your grades for week 1 completed by Sunday of this week. I'm pretty much on schedule to getting it done. So you should, I did section already. Section 2 I completed, so I'm working on section 1. But I did work on some discussion posts, but I'm going to be doing your written assignments. So make sure you get everything done timely as well. So then you'll notice on the 23rd, you'll have just 1 written assignment and a quiz that takes place. So the quarter moves pretty fast. So now let's look at the module 2. Let's look at the actual assignments again. And the assignments are, you know what? You can't see what I'm looking at. You can't see it because I have to share it. Oops, that is not what I want to show. Okay, this is what you should be seeing. So you couldn't see what I was talking about. So let's go back. I want to back up a minute before I do that. Let's go back and take a look at what I was talking about earlier that you could not see. Let's go back to even before the calendar. I want to go back to the home page. Again, reminding you about the lectures. And then these are the assignments that you heard me talking about. So you want to make sure that you read the announcements every week. And then you want to make sure that you participate in the discussion post, which I said we're due Tuesday night, and your reply post due Saturday. And then, of course, your written assignment is determinate or indeterminate sentencing, and the course project, selection of agency and contact person. Make sure you get that done. I gave you a rubric to make sure that you satisfy the requirements. And then I remind you that adversity is the springboard to success. So now let's move on and let's go into the module itself. Okay, let's go take a look at. All righty. Okay, so now back to the cover home page. So now let's go to this. I want to again go back to the course calendar. Sometimes we have technical issues navigating this thing, but hang in there. Okay, here we go, back to the course calendar. So now you can see it. You heard me talking about it before, but now you see it. Gives you your written assignments, your reading first. Then it tells you your initial post, live lecture, and your reply post. Then it tells you about your written assignment. And again, as I said earlier, that requires APA citations and references. You will lose points if you don't have citations and references, actually you'll lose 5 points. So you don't want to miss that. Be sure to do an adequate job of preparing the assignment, which requires 2 pages, not counting the cover sheet or the reference page. And repeating the facts does not help. I'm more interested in your critical thinking. Also, make sure you run your papers through Grammarly. And you guys have been doing pretty good with that. A few of you have not, but make sure that you run your papers through Grammarly, because it's very, very, very important, and because I've been able to see that you're doing more critical thinking, and that's what you're going to be graded on. So now let's go back to the assignments again. The assignment is a 2-page paper. It says up front. First, research the state that you reside and report if your state utilizes determinate or indeterminate sentencing. Include the basis or philosophy for your state's decision. In other words, explain why they went one way or the other. Or some states have a mix, but most have one or the other. Make sure that you cite your sources that you use, where you get the information. Second, don't just copy and paste stuff again. Second, argue which of these 2 types of options you believe is more effective. Again, provide something to support your position and why you think it's better, why it would be more beneficial to have determinate or indeterminate sentencing. Okay? So that's the written assignment. And then your discussion, the philosophy and goals of sentencing. So the project, which I spent a lot of time last week indicating the 4 things that you could do: jail, prison, probation, or parole. Jail, prison, probation, or parole. Don't use a police department. Don't use any other agencies. Those are the 4 that this paper needs to be on. So I stressed that last week. So you're going to contain a paragraph or 2 to describe the agency that you've selected. Include a sentence or 2 as to why you selected the agency. Justify it, explain it. In another paragraph, identify the person that you interview and provide their contact information. When making the initial contact, you then will have the opportunity to demonstrate transferable skills of communication, which we discussed last week, how important that you are able to communicate. Use appropriate audience, specific tone, and vocabulary to demonstrate your purpose of the contact. So you're going to do that when you actually do the interview, and that's going to be coming up. Submit your complete assignment by the links below. And be aware that this portion of the project, I mean, you can have references and citations, but you really won't be graded so much on that. I'm looking to see that you did the assignment and that you followed the processes in order to get the maximum number of points. So that's the assignments that are due Sunday. You'll do Sunday, these 2, the first 2. You know, of course, the reply post is due Saturday. Okay, so now let's get into the actual lesson content. The lesson content covers our objectives, outlining the basic goals of sentencing, describing the difference between determinate and indeterminate sentencing. Very important. We're going to elaborate on that a little bit. Explain mandatory sentencing, truth in sentencing, and sentencing guidelines. These are things that you should be able to, and you'll discover this from your reading that you'll find. Now, we're going to talk about sentencing issues in a minute and sentencing definitions. But your written assignments, again, are given, your discussion, and then your project, okay? So now let's look at sentencing issues. In corrections, there is an idea that the concept of deterrence, thinking that if you put a person in jail or incarcerate them, that they won't like it, and that it will further prevent crime. Well, it's been discovered that in reality, we know that many criminals are never caught and punished, so deterrence is not as effective. And you know, here's the deal: deterrence. The question is, by imprisoning people, do you decrease crime? Actually, the converse occurs, and I'll explain to you why. For example, you should be very well aware that there are many first-time offenders who will go into incarceration in prison, and they will learn how to become real criminals from some of the lifers, some of the more serious offenders who will teach them. I always said to somebody, and many people said this too actually, that if you want to learn a degree in criminology, which is actually an educational degree, but I use it for the reference of saying you want to learn about crime, you go to prison. And criminals will teach you. Unfortunately, they teach you the adverse aspects of it. So what happens is you come out and you develop these habits from the time that you've been in there and what you've been exposed to and who you've been exposed to, and you come out and you become a recidivist. So you repeat crime, and then the cycle goes on and on. And then what also happens is it becomes generational. I was a criminal defense lawyer for many years, and when I first started, I had one group of criminals, but as I continued down through the years, I began to represent some of the juveniles from some of the adult criminals, and then some of those juveniles also became adult criminals later. So it was a generational thing, and then they continued to produce relatives. So I started running to people, hey, aren't you so-and-so, so-and-so's brother? Yeah, you know my brother, you represented, blah, blah. They pick up those habits. And so as a result, is it really deterring? I don't think so. I think that the adverse is happening, and I think the statistics bear witness to that. Many believe that incapacitation, that is the act of putting someone in prison or isolating them, would also assist in crime prevention. Clearly, it says it does assist for a period of time. However, research does not show that incapacitation reduces recidivism, kind of like what I just said a few minutes ago. So then we come to the concept that many people believe, and I noticed that many of you guys take the same position. Yours truly, not because I'm your teacher or instructor, but because of the experience that I have had in the criminal justice system, from being a police officer, from being a village prosecutor, from being an investigator, from being a defense attorney, and all the concepts that go with those things, I have discovered that people will continue to commit crime unless they are redirected or changed. And the term that we use for doing that is rehabilitation. So, and if you take the word apart, rehabilitation. So what we're doing is rebuilding their habits and changing the direction. And so, how do we do those kinds of things? Well, a number of things. You should know that one of the things that brings many criminals into our system is drugs, addicted to drugs and narcotics. And so they commit crimes to support those habits. And what about the violent offenders? Well, the violent offenders oftentimes, you will find, have to do with individuals who didn't intend on violence. But if you stand in the way of something that their body is craving for, then that puts that person in that position where they will do anything and will not let you stand in the way, so far as even to kill you, to get money or whatever they need to go out and purchase those drugs that they need. And so as a result, they're either killed or they'll kill innocent people, and then they will become incarcerated. So then what do? We put those people in prison. They still got the drug habit. There's no programs for those individuals, or not adequate programming for them. So when they come out, what do? They're still having a need. And incidentally, while they're in there, you should be aware that there's problems with receiving drugs inside the facility itself. That's a very real issue that is faced in corrections. And so my point being is that we need to address the root problem, and if the root problem is drugs, we need to take care of that. I was a lawyer many times in drug court. Now, there are also people who are dealers, but one of the reasons that they're dealers is because of the fact that they need a job or an ability to be able to support their habit. Now, there are then another group. There's another group. The other group is straight dealers. These are people who, I use the term pimp, the people who are hooked on drugs, or the addicts, for their gain, and they make a lot of money off of them, and there's large quantities of drugs. So what we do try to do is we try to rehabilitate people by helping them to get off of the drugs and dependence for drugs. Another issue that we deal with in rehabilitation is the fact that there are many individuals who are found in situations where they have some mental issues. I was a teacher for a few years after I retired from being a lawyer in special ed. I ended up at a high school, and I had behavioral disorder kids, not the kids who had reading disorders or AD, well, not some of the ADD were the behavioral disorders, but not the ones who had communication disorders or other types of disorders. But I'm talking about the actual behavioral disorders, the ones who would act out or that needed to be on all kinds of drugs that they put these kids on to sedate them or control them. The point of the matter is that some of those kids went on to become juvenile delinquents and then adult delinquents and become career criminals. So there are some mental issues that need to be addressed. Just recently, I was saddened to hear that the President of the United States lifted the ban on lifted the requirement for a person to obtain a weapon to have a mental check background. That's disastrous. That is most ridiculous. And right now, if you're following the news, there's a guy right now who I think has some mental problems, who they're looking for, who mailed a letter to the White House threatening the president, and he has a cache of weapons, and they don't know where he is. They're looking for him. So what I'm trying to say is that these are the kinds of things that we need to have addressed in terms of that. So rehabilitation is very important. Another way, how do we increase the likelihood that a person will not commit a criminal offense? I always say that in addition to what I just talked about now, one of the key issues, and I've commented about this in some of your discussion posts, is education. It's clearly shown that it's cheaper to educate than to incarcerate. It's also clear that the more education that individuals get, the more opportunities open up for them to be able to learn a new way of living and supporting their families. And so as a result of that, the recidivism rate is adversely affected by that. I participated in a program that I talked about or shared with some of you in the discussion forum about where we had individuals come to felony court who qualified for probation. And with those individuals qualifying for probation, we had a program that we called Probation Challenge. Well, what the judge did in that courtroom was gave individuals who came before him to be sentenced for a crime if the pre-sentence investigation and report demonstrated that, number one, the offense was nonviolent, and then number two, that they hadn't really had any contact or even very little contact with the criminal justice system. But it was discovered that those individuals did not have a high school diploma. And so what they did was offer the opportunity to individuals who came before the judge to participate in the program. And to complete the program, it was required that they, of course, stay out of trouble, but that on the educational tip that they would obtain their GED and general education diploma. And so many of those who went through that program successfully got their GEDs. And I'm going to tell you what else happened is that there was a junior college in the city of Chicago that partnered with the program, and they were able to transfer into those schools, and some even went on to four-year institutions. And the criminal justice system didn't see them anymore in a negative fashion. So those individuals were rehabilitated. They were redirected, and so they were helped. And also one other issue, there's programs that are second chance programs that are presented that give inmates a chance to come out and be able to get jobs. And because criminals, felony record, disqualifies you for many jobs. But they're working towards having some programs that can help those individuals to get a second chance and to, again, give them financial ability to be able to support themselves and their families. So those are just some of the factors. Any other rehabilitation ideas that you have? I see we have Brittany here. Any ideas? You can type in the discussion in the chat box, and then I will see. Make sure that you set your setting to everyone, not just privately. So do you have anything, Brittany, that you can think of that I didn't cover concerning the issues that we've discussed? Okay, one student has left the meeting. So what about you, Brittany? Do you have any ideas? Any? Okay, I don't see any typing. Yeah. Okay. I was talking about that issue, but yeah, I agree. I agree a zillion % that the more programs that we can have addicts, and that's it. So you got the idea of what I had addressed earlier, that that the best way they don't repeat the same thing over and over again. Yeah, because here's the deal. A addict has I consider a health problem. Do you agree? Do you think being addicted to narcotics is a health issue? Yeah, and so since it being a health issue, it's just like any other issue. If you have a cold, you have to address and deal with the symptoms, and you have to do what it takes to recover. If you have the flu, pneumonia, or any other thing that are involved. And narcotics operate the same way, because what it is your body is actually giving out the orders, telling you, you had this term called craving, which means you're not really in control. You don't have control. And, we tell people, we talk about, getting the monkey off of your back. The narcotics ride you. They dictate every decision. You will steal from your loved ones. You'll even if you're working, you'll get your paycheck, and where will you go? You'll go to the drug dealer, and you'll spend money. And one other issue, there are times when the drug dealer will give you free stuff to get you addicted, so much to the point that then you'll have to go out and commit crimes, because they'll cut you off. They'll say, like, give you a sample, so to speak, and then they got you. And then they will begin to pimp you, to go out and sell the drugs and those kinds of things. So, and you know, and then not to mention the fact that, you know, I've heard young people say to me, well, you know, I could work for, maybe it would be a good idea to see how things work outside. Yeah. Again, prison is a bad place, especially for addicted people, because addicted people provide base for the long-term individuals. But the other point that I was getting ready to make is that those individuals are going to need to be taken like a gerbil off the wheel, jump off the wheel. But they'll commit crime, and then they'll ultimately sometimes even die, and they'll OD and do that. I had a young man that I represented some years ago, and this young man had been in trouble before several times. So I recognized that he had a drug problem. So he was arrested for a burglary, and so the bail hearing, they set the bail kind of high because he had been a repeat offender. Well, this young man ended up finding himself in a situation where his family, over my objections, bailed him out. I said, do not bail him out. Leave him in there. They got him out on bail. And a few days after he was out on bail, he left the house, crossed over the highway, and went over to a home on the other side of that highway, burglarizing it, and a chase ensued with the police chasing him. So he went back over the fence to get over the highway, and he was hit by multiple vehicles on that highway and killed. And I went to his funeral, and his mother said to me, I should have listened to you, Attorney Wright. I said, I knew that, because I knew that when he got out, if he didn't get the help. You know, here's the deal. When you give a person a bond and they're out, and you say, one of the conditions of bond is that you attend these programs. But there are many people who, they'll say yes to anything to get out because they need to get more of that stuff. They can get some from the inside, but they need more of it from the outside. And then they will do anything and everything like this young man did, and it was a sad situation. So it is something that we need to deal with. I want to continue on because we got about another half an hour or so to go, 27 minutes or so. Let's discuss the issue or consider the options for sentencing today. What kind of sentencing do we have? And who imposes the sentencing? Well, the judges issue the sentencing, and not anybody else, but the judge sentences an individual. Now, there are guidelines that judges have to abide by in terms of sentencing, because there are two types of sentencing. There's indeterminate sentencing or determinate sentencing. Now, with indeterminate sentencing, the judge has more discretion, and there are wide ranges of what the judge can give to an offender. And so it's determined in those situations that in many crimes that the judge has the last word. And what they do is, again, in every sentencing situation, there's what we call a PSI, pre-sentence investigation conducted, and a pre-sentence investigation report is provided to both the prosecution, defense attorney, the probation department, probation officers, and then the judge. And there are arguments generally presented of recommendation for the prosecution, and then request by the defense. Now, the other thing is that then there's presented what we call mitigating and aggravating circumstances. Mitigating circumstances are things that go against the defendant. Aggravating circumstances are those that go against the defendant. But mitigating circumstances are things that point towards a lighter sentence or giving that person a chance. So judges are guilty oftentimes, and we have seen it too much, of what we call slaps on the wrist, and individuals are released. So that's in indeterminate sentencing. In determinate sentencing, there is a shorter range that's presented, and that there's mandatory things. Like, for example, in Illinois, I will tell you that when I was in law school in 1977, which was my senior year, I graduated in 78 from Northwestern. I completed my senior research project on what we call House Bill 1500. Well, House Bill 1500 was the first major change to the Illinois Criminal Code since 1961. And so one of the things that we focused on was truth in sentencing. And we came up with concepts like the 3 strikes, or the Habitual Offenders Act, which means after 3 violent offenses. See, Illinois had 3 violent. Some states like California and some of the others just had 3 offenses. And they were, some were, I think, even misdemeanors. But the point of the matter is, even if they were felonies, they were non-violent offenses. And 3 strikes, and you got way a real serious period of incarceration. So they call those the Habitual Offenders Act. In addition to that, we produced what we call a section called Class X felonies, and those were sentences that a minimum of 6 and a maximum of 30. And the judge had, that's kind of a mixture of determined and indeterminate. However, if you saw what really began to happen is that people were getting an average of 10 to 15 years. And then the third thing that happened is that they did away with what we call good time, where it used to be that you served 10 years. You were sentenced to 10, but 10 automatically meant 5. And you heard me talk about that in the incident that happened with my parents when I was a kid. But it was still like that for many, many, many years when I first started practicing. And then they began to do away with that kind of thing. So, so the point of the matter is with determinate sentencing, the guidelines were given and the judge's hands were tied. Now, the only thing that could happen is the prosecution, it could be negotiated to reduce the charges. If the charges were reduced, then from murder like to manslaughter, then you had a whole different ballgame. But if it stayed with the charges, then the sentence was already given by the legislature, and the judge had a very small window to deal with that. And then there were individuals who did not, the judge couldn't give probation to or supervision to because they had taken that out of the judge's hands. So, so then there was a debate about it. So you're going to have a chance to deal with that. And I've said here that the guidelines limit the judge's decision, and there's which includes what we call presumptive sentencing. And so it's given, it's right there. Judge discretion can further be limited by mandatory minimum sentences, the same kind of thing I was talking about a few minutes ago with Class X, 6 to 30. So the judge couldn't give you like 5 years or 4 years or 3 years. You already knew it was going to start with 6. And those were the people who either didn't commit a very violent, or who hadn't been in the system, or either were victims of the system. Maybe they had some drug problems or something like that that hadn't been addressed. The bottom line is that it began to provide more of a real method for providing the amount of time that an individual might serve. Now, the question that somebody asked is, did this help in deterring individuals? Again, I already answered that. Even then, it still didn't. What it really did was take those individuals off of the street longer. But the bad news is, the longer they're in, the more they're going to learn about crime. And then when they do get out, then here we go back with the ding on recidivism. So it ends in this section. It says it's important to understand the many sentencing options that the role of corrections carry out. Remember, corrections doesn't determine it. But here's what happens. Now, when you get to parole, which you know the difference between parole and probation. Probation is something that takes place when you are not incarcerated. But probation occurs, but parole occurs after you have served some of your time and then you are released earlier to finish the rest of your time outside, or either maybe in a situation where sometimes you're under house arrest and you'll have a monitor and those kind of things on you. So that's the difference there. But it's important to understand that in those situations, you still have someone you have to report to. So, and that's it for the sentencing issues. Do you have any other comments before I get to the definitions themselves, Brittany? Okay, while you're gathering that, I do just want to say that, okay, good. The thing that I do want to remind every one of you guys who are in corrections, being a corrections officer, and I have a student that I have talked to already. She's getting ready to. She was one of my top students. She became an advisor on my advisory board when I was the state program coordinator. And I spoke with her, and I'm going to try to invite her to come to one of our sessions a little further down the road. Particularly, be nice for the females to hear because of the fact that she's a female and she's had the opportunity to actually run the facility, a male facility. And she's got a number of years. And she, after having me for a number of classes, we had some residential and then some online, and then serving on my advisory board, she got her associate, then went on and finished and got her bachelor's, and now she's on her way to law school. But the point I'm saying is that I was happy because she said she was influenced by many of the things that I said. And so since she had worked many, many years in the corrections department, she said that she really had this drive to want to, represent people and work in criminal law. And so I'm excited. I'm going to be her mentor throughout the process. So those are the kinds of things that excite me. So anyway, I'm hoping to have her come in, and I hope I get a better attendance than I do here. I may even open it up, talk to the department chair about the possibility of opening it up for other students and other classes to come in. But I want to give priority, and there's a lot of you guys in both of my sections. I got 35 of you in one section and like 15 in the other. So just you guys alone showing up would be good for that. So that's something that I'm working on. But I was going to say is that in correction, dealing with correction officers, I have taught this course before and other correction courses. I have learned that correction officers are what are they? They're counselors. They're like the police inside the place. You got multiple responsibilities there. You have to be able to, and it's very, 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 very important to be fair and impartial. You'll hear all of that though later on. So anyway, that's something that I'm working on, and I'm not sure which week, but I'm going to determine it and give you guys plenty of time. Okay, so let's go to the sentencing definitions, where we're going to conclude. So what is general deterrence? So here's how you know the answer. You flip it over. Flip it over. It uses punishment to prevent others from committing crimes. The idea that severely punishing the convicts will deter others who are contemplating crimes. Well, we know. Oh, you know, while I'm thinking about deterrence, there used to be an argument, oh, you know, the death penalty, it will deter crime. The death penalty doesn't deter criminals. The only one that deters is the individual who's executed. There's been studies done, research done to demonstrate that there's been many individuals who are aware that they could face the death penalty in situations, and they still continue to commit the crimes. So even the sentence of facing death is not a deterring factor that takes place as well. Okay. So next, let's look at specific deterrent. So I gave you what's general. So what's specific deterrent? Focuses on the individual. The offender should learn that crime does not pay as a result of a harsh criminal penalty experience. Again, not really showing in numbers, not showing in decreases in individuals who ended up being incarcerated. So I guess what I'm really saying is, you can tell I'm not a real big fan of the issue of deterrence, and I'm not that, because I've seen what it does. Then we get into incapacitation. Let's deal with the issue of capacitation. What do we do here? Well, and we physically restrain or isolate offenders to protect them. So what we do is we will put somebody in, maybe in solitary confinement, or either they will physically be restrained while they're in prison, or either they are placed in a situation where they can't be among the other population. Now, again, in that kind of a situation, they do that for a number of reasons. But again, it's basically just providing security from society. The bottom line is, as long as they're behind prison walls, there is less likely a chance that they can commit crimes outside the walls. Listen to what I said. And the reason why I said that is that it's been proven fact that there are people who are behind the walls who order things to happen outside the walls, even when they are physically restrained or isolated. Trust me. Next one. Selective incapacitation. So let's see what that is. Repeat offenders. We get longer prison terms. I already spoke about that. You know, the longer a person is in prison, the more they learn how to become a criminal, and the more they become a repeat offender. Simple as that. You know, one of the issues that they always say with people who are offenders released, stay away from felons, known felons. Well, who are they associated with while they're in prison? Known felons. So when they get out, who are they going to be participating with? You know, I mean, there are programs, like I pastor a church, and we have had situations where we had community service and things like that of people who've been incarcerated to come and do things around the church. But I'm saying that in reality, even in those situations, it doesn't matter. If a person's been a repeat offender, number one, there's something not been addressed, and if they're given, okay, you do it the second time, you get a stronger sentence. All you're doing is putting them in an environment where they could even go even longer, or ultimately kill somebody and commit a violent offense, or either get killed themselves. And I've seen that happen too, both of those. Rehabilitation. Now we're coming over to something. Now, again, if our society is going to be more punitive, more dealing with punishment-oriented, as opposed to rehabilitation, we always said once that if you want a dog to become a bad dog, you mistreat that dog. or subject them to being mistreated, or you may have heard this before, but it's a truth. They said if you include in the dog's food gunpowder, they said the gunpowder will turn that dog into a violent dog, a mean dog. And, so some dogs have become generationally, like the pit bull is known as a violent dog. On the other hand, the German Shepherd, which is a big dog, is not associated with that. But the point of the matter is that I'm getting back to the point here, is that how people are treated, the environment they're placed in, and then if you address the problems that keep them coming back, then you begin to rehab them. When you rehab something, you gut it, you change it out. If you know anything about rehabbing houses, that means what people do is they take an old house and they gut it and they will bring it up to speed or up to date, and then it becomes a more livable place. Well, rehabilitation is the act of rehabbing an individual, as I said earlier. But let's see what they say in definition. Changing an offender's behavior, their attitudes, their beliefs, or character. Now, here's the deal. What is character? Character is who you are when nobody's watching, creating a better trust situation. And so if you're going to be using that as a goal that you're heading towards, I say great. It's not going to be easy. And what it does is it takes time. Old habits take time to go away. They don't just go away overnight just because you offer a good opportunity to someone without having them, helping them. That's like a person, again, back to the person that we know that both Brittany and I would agree that has a drug problem, and you give them a job and then they steal. Then you say, see, I gave them a chance. Well, no, you never addressed the root issue. That was the narcotics issue that had to be dealt with and changed because they're not in control of those situations. And they're actually victims themselves and create victims around them as well. So that's what we want to do. I always tell people we want to send people in a 180-degree direction. If you think about it, I tell people, would you go in? Some people always say, oh, I want to do a 360. I said, no, you don't know what that you just said. What you said is you went a complete circle. You end up back where you started. No, a 180 is good because you're facing the opposite direction. A 90-degree turn is not good because at 90, you can still see where you came from, that you still have some of that, and then you have where you're going. Well, the closer you move from 90 over towards 180, then the better off that you are, So you get from 90 to 120 to 160, and then you get to 180, and bam. And then from that point on, when you begin to move in the other direction, you're starting to move backwards, even if you go up higher. So the closer you're getting to the other. So 180 is the perfect scan or direction that you're going. And I teach that in church, but I also tell people that that's the type of thing that we want to accomplish. Just desserts. What this means is very simply that punishment is commensurate with the crime or the offense. And in other words, you get what you deserve. That's pretty much what it's saying. So that's what just desserts are. Again, the philosophies about doing that is that punitive. Again, you keep the person incarcerated and incapacitated for a longer period of time, but we've already addressed what the result is. I have heard this, that there are some people who don't really want to see sentencing, rehabilitation, because if rehabilitation takes place enough and there are fewer criminals, then there are individuals who are in various fields will have to get other jobs. Well, let's have that first. Let's get to that point first. We're going to talk about that. Let's get to it and see what happens. I think people, educated community, and I said this to someone earlier today, an educated community is a prosperous community. An educated society is a prosperous society. Restorative justice. Restorative justice is repairing the harm done. The offender makes amends or restitution or loss to the victim. So that's when you get into restitution, serving community service, and those kinds of things. So you're moving in the right direction, because what you're doing is what I used to do, when I was a criminal defense lawyer, I used to represent some really bad dudes and girls, and I used to talk to them about accountability for their actions. Even if they were acquitted or received a light sentence, I explained to them, I says, you have to learn to accept some responsibility for the things that you did or the situations that you placed yourself in, so that you end up with being charged for crimes. I often told people that if crime takes place in a place and you're not there, it's less likely that you're going to be charged. There are times when people are, but they stand a better chance of being exonerated than if they're there and say, well, I was there, but I didn't participate. I had a young man I represented, and he hung with some guys, and this guy, they went out drinking, and when they drank, and he drank an excessive amount, and he fell asleep in the back of the car. Well, the other three guys there ended up entering a residence and committed residential burglary. And so as a result of them committing residential burglary, a police chase ensued, and they ended up getting caught, and all four of them were charged with residential burglary. Well, I came in as the defense attorney for the young man who was knocked out asleep. And I was able to prove, first of all, number one, I moved to have a separate trial because of the fact that his defense was going to be different from their defense, because he was the one that was, so I actually produced enough evidence directly from the police and everybody that when they pulled the vehicle over, that my client was in the back seat. And then when they did blood work, they discovered that he had such a high content of alcohol in his blood that he couldn't have been conscious for a long period of time and was knocked out asleep. So as a result, I ended up getting him off. But it cost his mother $10,000 for me to represent him and to reach that conclusion, because it took a little while. He was out on bail. That was the good thing. But the point of the matter is that what got him in trouble was who he was hanging with. And he also said to me, and he knew, he said, Attorney Wright, he says, I knew these guys pretty well. We were friends for years. He said, they're always in trouble. I said, but you weren't really always in trouble. You have to be careful who the company you keep. So anyway, that goes with the points that I'm talking about. So anyway, back to this issue here is that community service is an opportunity for a person to serve and give back to the community for something that they did wrong. Okay. Equity goal of punishment. So what's the equity goal of punishment? What is the offender has to pay back for their loss? The justice system for the loss, for processing their case, and society for the disruption because of their crimes. So we get into, again, dealing with community service, we deal with restitution, and court costs as well. So that's a part of that as well. And what you're doing then is you're heading toward the direction of taking that person in a new direction, but letting them understand from a substantive point of view financially that it's going to cost them, and then also that they also begin to learn how it feels to deal with people who are their victims as well. Concurrent sentences. Now, I already know a whole lot about this. Let me explain to you why I know about this. Well, first of all, let me give you the definition. A person convicted of 2 or more crimes and the sentences begin the same day and are completed with the longest running has been served. Let me give you an example. I told you about my parents, but the person I met when I was a young kid, 14, and asked to be my mother, who became my friend in 1971, and she legally adopted me later. She was the victim of a car. It wasn't using the term carjacking, but it really was, where they forced her to drive her car. They didn't take the car, but they made her drive the car. So it's kind of kidnapping. Made her drive her car from one end of town to the other, and she had a guest with her. Well, they took her to an isolated forest preserve, told her and the other person to lay down. They were both shot in the head, point blank. She survived, and he did not. Well, the newspapers came out because the individual who committed the offense, it said, was sentenced to 120 years. That's what it said, 120 years. And so that was good. That was good. But it was brought to my attention that really what was happening was that there were 4 30-year terms that would run concurrent, which meant for each of the crimes that were committed, the attempted murder on my mother and aggravated battery or whatever the charges were, and then the murder and whatever the other charge was. But anyway, they were sentenced for, if you multiply 30 times 4, that's 120. But if you take 30-year sentence, and each day one part of each of those sentences is served, then it becomes 30 years. Then at that time, they had what they called good behavior, a day for a day, which further cut that 30 years down to 15 years. And then if a person was good while they were incarcerated, they could cut it down even another 2.5 to 3.5 years. And ultimately, that's what this person did. This person ultimately ended up serving roughly 12.5 years for killing one person and for attempting to kill another. But it's because of concurrent sentencing. So concurrent sentencing is kind of passé now. We don't have a lot of concurrent sentencing now. But that's what concurrent sentencing about, and that's how it can take place. Then we have consecutive sentencing. Now, it makes sense what I'm about to say. Consecutive means you finish one sentence, you start the other. And so that's what it's going to say here. It says a person convicted of 2 or more crimes, the first sentence must be completed before the second one begins. So we have here a situation here in our courts here where a police officer was charged with murdering his wife, and he was sentenced to so many years. I can't remember what it was. I think it was either 60 years. It was a long time, and it was 60 years. So there was no good behavior. There's no day for a day and none of that. So 60 meant 60. All right, now, while he was incarcerated, he attempted to put a contract out on the prosecutor, which was a dumb move, and the person that he collaborated with turned on him and got a deal. And he was subsequently convicted of the attempt or putting out a contract to kill the prosecutor, which I think gave him 30 more years. So here's the deal. He's going to have to serve those 60 before the 30 even starts. So that's 90 years. And even with him serving, getting 10 years off, that's 80 years. He's already in his 50s when he goes in. So what does that mean? It means he won't get out. So that's how consecutive sentencing works. So those words make a big difference in how much time the person serves. Determinate sentencing, again, we talked about that. Flip it over. A fixed term of years, the maximum established by the legislator. We talked about that, okay? Indeterminate sentencing permits early release from a correction institution after the offender serves a minimum portion of the sentence. And that creates an issue for many people, okay? So we talked about that. Sentencing guidelines. Sentencing guidelines are based on how serious the crime is and the background of the individual. And that's what I was talking about a few minutes ago when there is a pre-sentence investigation, a pre-sentence report prepared to determine what's adequate for that person to be sentenced to based upon their experience in the criminal justice system and the seriousness of the offense. Presumptive sentencing guidelines. Legislature sets the penalties for the acts straight up. There's no leeway, nothing. It is what it is. You commit the act, and then you get the penalty because you are successfully prosecuted for committing the act or plead guilty. Mandatory minimum sentences. Mandatory minimum sentences means very simply specifies a certain number of years of incarceration for a crime. So that means that you have to serve so many years, and you can't, there's no early or period from what that mandatory sentencing guideline is. Three strikes law, I talked about that earlier, but we call it the Habitual Offenders Act. Repeat offenders receive long sentences with no parole for conviction of a third or more felony. And like I said, most jurisdictions have violent felonies as the offense or the potential for a violent felony. Let me give you what happened. Remember that guy I told you that got the 12 and a half years for killing the one person and for shooting my mom? Well, when he, my adopted mom, well, when he was released, here's what happened. When he committed the offense against my mother, the Habitual Offender Act hadn't come into effect, but he had just gotten out for a violent offense. And then he committed the second violent offense was against my mother and that person. So when the Habitual Offender Act came about in '77, which was years later after that, it allowed the times to be counted for crimes that you had committed before that. So it wasn't ex post facto either, because the next crime you had to commit would qualify you for that third strike. So and so anyway, my point is, what happened is that in '86, it was actually '86 in January, he was arrested and charged with stealing a vehicle, and he was arrested and was possession of a weapon, which was a offense for a violent offender, a gun, because he had used a gun in both of his previous crimes. That gave him his 3 strikes, and so he was sentenced then to a straight period of term of 25 years, and then he never finished it. He died in prison. So my point being is that the sentence was so long that he never hit the streets after that third time. Truth in sentencing. The term kind of describes itself. Requires offenders to serve substantial portions of their sentence and reduces the discrepancy between the imposed sentence and the actual time served. And that's the end of that. So that's about it. We are out of time. I'm a few minutes over, but I ask you, do you have any questions? Any questions or any comments or anything that, so you're privately. Remember I said I always change it to so that everyone can see it. Could you set it so everyone see it, because it'll show up then? Ask that same question, change your setting to everyone. All you have to do is hit this little arrow here and change it to everyone. And everyone is you and me in this situation. So you need to do that in the future lectures, make sure. But anyway, the answer is yes, absolutely. Yeah, the three-strike laws still exist. We in Illinois vehemently enforce it. So the answer is yes. Yes, the three-strike laws do still exist. Definitely. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Okay. So anyway, that's about it. Then I'm going to say good night. And I've already provided guidelines for the assignment and everything. I discussed that before you came on. So you have a good evening. And remember what I said. Next time you do it, change it from privately to everyone. So if you do it just with my name on it, it's going to say privately. But make sure that you do to everyone in the future. So I'm going to say good night. Remember, our next lecture is 2 weeks from today. And that's about it. So I'm going to end the meeting.